Hi, this is Lindsay Sudeikis. I am YouTubing live from the traditional homelands of the Ohlone peoples, their territory, known as Berkeley, California. Today is Thursday, February 21st, 2019. I think the first thing I'm going to ask to share is that just that we have a moment of warm eyes to warm eyes, even virtually. So whoever might be listening to this at another time, just to see each other's humanity, and warm hands to warm hands. I say that because it's come online for me. A few people suggested maybe doing something on YouTube Live, so it wasn't just on Facebook. Some of these meaningful musings that I am feeling inspired to do. And I just would humbly ask that anyone who comments on this video, that you just take a moment to quiet your heart and see my humanity, which is blessed and broken all at once, and know that I see you in your dignity and in your unrepeatability. Yeah, I really mean that. So, what you can sense in the energetics of my voice. There's a lot on my heart in these days. I'm sure on so many of our hearts in these days. When I was praying about what to speak about next, or and share about, and just open up dialogue about, couple things came to mind in heart. One, there's been some recent articles in the New York Times just this last weekend, one on Saturday and on Sunday, and then another one on Tuesday, each of which I feel I could speak to. I'm just going to quote the titles. I have them here. On Saturday, it came out, Opinion, Everything I Know About Feminism I Learned from Nuns. This gave a lot of hope and sweetness for the life of a nun, of which I had the great honor and privilege of being inside, what some call the Blessed Walls, the convent. And I was grateful to read that piece. And then a heavier one and an important one on Sunday came out, quote, it is not a closet, it is a cage. Gay Catholic priests speak out. And this piece was written in anticipation of the conference that's opened up today, that Pope Francis has invited many of the bishops from around the world to have open dialogue around the sexual abuse crisis and the wounds that have been inflicted in really profound, hurtful ways. And then another article that just came out yesterday, quote, the Catholic Church is breaking people's hearts. It's about a lesbian woman who was fired from her position at a Catholic high school. Wait until you read what was done, not just to her, but even worse, to her devout father and her supportive students. So God knows I have much to say about each of these articles, as I'm sure so many people have much to say. And when I say I have much to say, let me drop in with it. I just want to name the complexity and multi-layered and profound dimensions of what it means to be part of a tradition that, on the one hand, namely a Catholic tradition, that on the one hand is sanctifying and is authenticating and is steeped in mystery and in being, inherently and organically connected with all that is. And at the same time, it's a tradition that has themes of empire and hegemony, dominance, and dogmatism also all around it. And what is being asked by the institutional church, by folks who are ordained ministers in this Catholic tradition, what is being asked of folks who are in the pews, who make up the body of the church and the majority of the church, and what's being asked of people who have maybe Catholic lineage in their ancestry and want to have nothing to do with it, and what's being asked by those who've been victims of abuse, whether it is of empire or of abuse, sexual abuse, or of dogmatism. Right? So there's a lot online, and it's my understanding that if we can start to break open dialogue in heart-centered, grounded ways, and start to acknowledge the deep troubles and wounds that Catholicism has inflicted upon people, and for Catholic folk to stop being defensive about those truths and rather soften and listen in. That it's my hope and belief that healing and understanding and compassion and humanity and kinship can emerge. So I'd love to be part of that, and God knows I'm trying to be part of it. That's one. There's some things there clearly that are present. The second thing would be that I would love to talk about, that is certainly tied into this, is the Segura Land Trust. Segura Te Land Trust. I'll put it in the link. SOGOREATE Land Trust announced yesterday that there was this first ever documented reparations from an individual to a tribe in the entire state of Kansas. So the Kaw Nations, the people, the traditional homelands of the people of what's now known as Kansas, which is the lands that I was nourished by as a child through the time I was 18. And still my folks live there, and I go back often, and I'm so grateful to those lands. That here there's an example of someone who actually not only acknowledged that they were on the lands of the Kaw peoples, but actually gave back the land to the Kaw Nations people. I mean, anyone can recognize the advantages they have received from living on stolen land by giving it back, opening it up, and sharing its benefits. So her family farm once belonged to the Kaw Indians, and she decided to pay them back financially, which, yes, right, more of that. I share this, in tandem with what I was just sharing about the notions of empire and hegemony, because as so many Catholic folks know, which is tragic, another wound of the church would be the fact that Catholic folk decimated in really intentional and aggressive ways indigenous lands and indigenous languages and indigenous ways, cutting their hair and forcing them to look a certain way, and forcing them to speak English and no longer their native tongue, and in some ways even forcing them to be baptized into a tradition that they didn't want to be baptized into. And so it's another question, an inquiry that I think is important for Catholic folks to reckon with. And I want to share here, I'm not anti-Catholic, right? I Lindsay and George Sudeikis. George is my confirmation saint. Anne is my middle name, who is the mother of Mary, historically, right, traditionally. former servant of the Lord and the Virgin of Matarao, known as Maria del Divino Amore, Italian for Mary of Divine Love, of which I, as many of you know who are listening, know that that's very much is what I feel called to embody in this lifetime. Woke up this morning on my knees, praying 3 Ave Marias to the Creator with this prayer, the Suscipe Domine, written by Ignatius of Loyola, mystic of the 16th century, to the Redeemer, inviting in that I can heighten my awareness of the infinite, divine, penetrating love that God and life and mystery have for me and have for all beings. And also a 3rd Ave Maria to the Sanctifier, to the Spirit, asking that the Spirit of God can penetrate and enlighten the Spirit within me so that I can live in that unity, and for the gifts and the fruits of the Spirit to be imbibed fully in me and by me and upon all of those who have to listen to me or hear me or witness me in any way, that it might be joy and generosity and wisdom that they bear witness to. And then I proceeded to go to Holy Mass this morning, to daily Mass. I'm here in Berkeley, as I said, and walked down this morning at St. Mary Magdalene Parish. It's a Dominican parish, immersed in at 8 a.m. with about 25 parishioners, and praise Christ that the priest offered up the sacrifice of the Mass, also known as the Wedding Feast of the Lamb, for the fruits, praying for the fruits of this council that's happening in Rome that started today, as I mentioned moments ago, about the sexual abuse crisis, and for healing, and that the dialogue can happen, and that not only the dialogue, but that the institutional church and the episcopate, which are the bishops, and the ordained priest, and other folks can claim, we have wronged you. And not only with this issue of sexual abuse, but with other issues, right, of human sexuality, of firing a lesbian counselor in Indianapolis, this article. We have hurt you in ways of empire, of decimating indigenous peoples and their lands and their traditions on this soil in the United States. Acknowledging the wrong. And then it's like that phrase, awareness, acceptance, action, like to become aware of it, to accept it, the wrongdoing that's happened, and to pray through and discern through what's the next right action. And I say this because I'm not saying that the answer is just like bounce on the Catholic Church and like that's a wrap, and F you and all the misogyny and all the patriarchy, and that's not my stance. I believe that the Catholic mystical tradition is one that is authenticating and liberating and humanizing, and puts at the center those who are on the fringes of society. It puts at the center that we belong to each other. It puts at the center our brothers and sisters who are in Yemen, where the famine is happening, and loving on them and sending food their way. It puts at the center welcoming the stranger, loving on folks who are imprisoned, loving on folks who are hungry, and not only physically hungry, but spiritually hungry. John of the Cross, that only loving is my duty, right? And so what's the way forward? Christ says in the Gospels, anyone who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not fit for the kingdom of heaven. And I'm not saying here that we need to just keep looking back and apologizing and mea culpa, and what the church has done, and not look ahead. But what I am saying is that if we're invited to be in right relationship with God and all our relations and all that is and all of the beings, which is the ask, which is the invitation, rather, from the cosmic Christ, then my question to my fellow Catholics from the one holy Catholic apostolic tradition, and to their peers, and to folks who are against the Catholic Church, and to folks who are pissed at the Catholic Church, rightfully so, my curiosity here is, what is the invitation to be in symbiosis with one another and with a tradition that on the one hand vivifies and on the other hand vilifies, right? How can we learn to accentuate and harvest and succour, like take from the blessings and the goodness and that which vivifies, and strengthen that and expand that and bring that forward, and to quiet and tend to that which vilifies and heal it. which brings to the third idea of what I would love to share more about at some point, would be this tradition of animism, in which is all throughout the tenets of the Catholic Church, the Catholic mystical tradition. And by animism, I mean, the word comes from the Latin anima, right? Soul, breath, life, that all that is has breath, has life. And in the first book of the Christian scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, right, of Genesis, which are the Hebrew scriptures, but Christianity honors both the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, is all about the fish, the light and the water and the land and the sun and the moon and the stars and the plants and the trees and the fruits and the birds and the serpents and the cattle and the fish, and quote, every kind of wild beast. That in that story, humans don't even come on the scene till the fifth day, to this poetic fifth day. And when you think about the wide expanse of time, that Sister, is it Ilio? I can put it in the link, talks about how if you were to think of all of creation in a 24-hour segment, humans didn't come on the scene until 11:59 p.m. on that evening. And so what was going on for the other 23 hours and 59 minutes? So this anthropocentric, human-centered narrative that the Catholic Church has been caught up in for centuries is, as I will be so bold to say, is an anathema according to what Christ was actually about. Christus was about the plants and the sun and the sky and the moon and the anima, the breath and the soul, that all that is matters. And we are invited as humans to be in symbiosis with those birds and with the wind and with one another. And what does it mean to you, right? What's it mean to be in symbiosis? What's it mean to allow alchemy to happen in your heart, right? That, alchemy, I love this dictionary definition, the second dictionary definition, that a power or process by which something mysteriously or impressively transforms. A power or process that transforms something in a mysterious or impressive way. Yes, to alchemy, right? Because what can happen if there's this power or process where we allow ourselves to be loved on and for goodness to be imbued within us by our communities of people, of faith traditions, of schools, of with your colleagues, with your elders in your community, with your animals, with your plant life, with the elements, with the rivers that you live by. What's the alchemy that can happen? What awaits? And not like in these big mountaintop moments, or like have to go to the desert moments, but in the quotidian of life. Praise for the quotidian of life and finding and being in symbiosis with it. And with the hope I have and the deep sense of wonder I have, of which I'm grateful to God and to all the holy ones that surround me, and whose bones of bones of bones of bones of bones I belong to, my holy and luminous ancestors, blood ancestors. I have been graced, to have been born into wonder and continually to be born into wonder. Nascantor in admiratione is this Latin phrase for having been born unto wonder. And I really believe that wonder is yet another antidote to the ills and the cultural ills and the cultural troubles that are pervasive in American exceptionalism and capitalism, and also in Catholicism, right? and in other ways, surely. And these are just two of the ones that I can speak to with the most authenticity and integrity, having been part of both of those and continuing to be part of both of those ideologies. Okay. You know, any of you who have listened in and leaned in right now, I'm grateful. Thank you. And I just, if there are questions that you have or things I could, there we go, a little text. It's live. It's good. Or what you'd want to hear about or listen in about, or then please put that in the comments so that I can kind of know what to speak to or how to speak to it. And yeah, just giving some breath. I'm sharing a thing here because I feel that God and my ancestors are asking me to speak to some of this, and not for my sake, for love's sake, and for the cultural healing that's needed in so many facets, in so many ways. Yeah. So, okay. Wonder is a great antidote. Playfulness is a great antidote. And so is deep, deep lamentation and like grief, soul tears and grief of the reparations that are needed because of the church's teaching and the lack thereof in its congruence with what Yeshua, Christ, intended. So here's to reclaiming who and how Christ was, an animist, a mystic, a lover, full stop. Yeah, praise. Good to be with you.